I hope you ordered the DVD on Patrick Henry.
1 minute until showtime.
I'll be right back.
I'd like to experience God on the job. The good news is that God wants this as well.
Let's take a minute to consider a biblical principle that you can apply on the job with Scott Huckabee for Priority Associates.
This is a test here, John.
Society conditions us
Trying to see if Truth Radio cuts off at the top of the hour like they're supposed to, so my show can come
told
up.
us our greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind.
So hang
We're
on.
not loving God if we exclude Him from our work. We spend too much time on the job to partition Him out of this aspect of our lives. One good way to involve God in your work is to pray about your challenges throughout the day. This gives God an opportunity to show that He cares about your work. As you experience God working with you on the job, you'll grow in faith and enjoy a closer relationship with Him.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds.
For more
4,
information on how to better
3,
experience
2,
the Lord on the job,
1.
please visit Priority Associates.
Blog Talk Radio.
He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial.
I'll keep my freedom, I'll keep my guns, try to keep my money and my religion too.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
I'm gonna keep my big B8, keep my friends the same, keep the government out of my business, and y'all can keep the change.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas.
We know what we need, we know who to blame.
Catch the Free American Hour, weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
I'll keep the USA and y'all can keep the change.
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American Hour. I'm your host, Clay Douglas. My guest today is John Kaminski. Hello, John. How are you?
Good morning, Clayton. Just fine.
Yeah, John, I was kind of just anxious to get you back on. You're probably one of the few people out there, and I just put out a story on this. You're one of the few people out there that really understands what's been happening to me for the last 7 years or so.
You're in a rather large class, Clayton. I hate to tell you, but we know all the names of the people who are in that class practically, and we had two new members join last week, Pat Buchanan and Judge Napolitano.
That's right. Both men that I admire. I've interviewed Pat Buchanan a number of times. And let's see, we're coming up for a presidential election. We got a war going on, and let's see who controls Clear Channel. Oh yeah, the Mossad, doesn't it?
Yeah, we got a Clear Channel radio station in our town. I never listened to it, but it's just a little mom and pop operation. And God, all of those now. It's like you can't get any news anywhere except on shows like this and in certain places on the internet, because all you have to do is turn on the TV and see the artificial reality that they're talking about. I mean, every night on the evening news there's this segment about how terrible the Syrian government is, and it's the same kind of show that was how terrible the Libyan government was, and we saw what happened to Libya, and now we want to do the same thing to Syria. And Americans are walking around in a daze, not realizing any of it, and especially not realizing that all the opposition to the Syrian government is essentially produced by the U.S. government through their proxies in Turkey and elsewhere, and their Blackwater mercenaries. And the United States, the people in the United States are so entrained to obey what they hear on television that they don't recognize any part of reality at this point.
And if you come up and try to tell them, I mean, J. Edgar Hoover, I think he had it right when he said, well, you know, the individual is overwhelmed, you know, when he comes face to face with a conspiracy so vast he can't comprehend it.
Yeah, and people shut down and escape from it, but in doing so, it's like as a culture, we signed our death warrant by doing this, as all our freedoms have been steadily eroded over 100 years, and there's practically nothing left now, and now you can't even say anything, or there's worse classes than what we're in, Clayton. A lot of those people are dead, a lot of their lives are completely ruined, and, you know, I was just thinking before we started, I was trying to think how people in Afghanistan feel about the United States. I try to empathize with other people whenever I can, and I realized that if there's an American soldier in Afghanistan who turns his back on an Afghan, he's risking death, because all the Afghan people, even the ones who are being paid off by the Americans to do what the Americans say, all of the American people realize that, I mean, all the Afghani people realize that the Americans are their jailers. And I think we need to borrow that perception and apply it to Americans, because right now, we have our existences are being shrunk, not terminated, where we can do less and less, we can say less and less. The people who are saying things opposing what the government is doing are deprived of their livelihoods, or severely penalized or killed, and we're being forced, it's all about the force, we're being forced to accept the lies they tell us. And unfortunately for everyone in the world, the majority of Americans have accepted those lies for many years, and that's why we're in the situation we're in.
You know, the Russians, they referred to communism as Judaism for the masses, and aren't we in that exact same spot here, the exact spot that the Russians were before they killed 60 million of them?
It's kind of like the difference between Aldous Huxley and George Orwell in their very similar books about the future. Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1932 and predicted that through movies that you could feel and something called soma, that people would come to love their servitude, whereas Orwell is the other one, is the other pole. And he said that the government is going to absolutely force us into what we are allowed to believe in the future. So in a way, you can compare Huxley to the United States and Orwell to Russia. And
these both of these. Now I'm glad you brought that up, because my question has been, John, who won the Cold War? I'm sorry, I don't see that. I don't see communism falling. I see it moving to Broadway. You know.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
They changed offices. They moved their offices.
The only people who ever win any of those wars, and that's all the wars of the 20th century, certainly not the combatants. It's not the two principal parties. It's the bankers and their assistants who set up the conditions, who manipulated the social conditions so that the war became the apparently logical answer to it. But every circumstance of every war in the 20th century has been manufactured by very rich people who stood to make money off the transaction, and that's still going on in spades.
And they eat their own too. How many wealthy people did they sacrifice on their Titanic? Oh, yeah. Just all the ones that were in opposition to the international banksters.
Yeah, they're very efficient about that. They very seldom let somebody escape. That's what a lot of people have been talking about. Why Ron Paul appears to be soft and tongue-tied on so many issues is that we have no idea how many times he's been threatened with death.
A number of times. You know, I mean, they first threatened me with death almost 25 years ago, John. That's and that was kind of the changing point in my life when I decided to publish, when a Vietnam vet handed me the pretty much top secret documentation on Operation Watchtower, you know, involving the CIA and Mossad and the drug business. And now I've been on the fringes of the whole drug industry. I helped start High Times, and I was in the paraphernalia industry, and I sold the peace symbols to Kmart's, you know. So I was also, you know, a biker, so I'm kind of used to the cops watching me or following us around. I mean, if you wore leather in the 60s, you were the bad guy, right?
I guess so. I was never a leather. Well, I did wear some in the 60s, but it was different then. It was like there was some kind of social approval to all that radicalism. People wanted the flower children in a certain way, in that it just gave them a new perspective on things. But it was just another Illuminati ploy to destabilize America. It's like they always fund both sides of every issue and go for maximum destabilization either way, and that's why we haven't been able to keep America together. That, and of course the total rampant corruption of Jewish money in the system.
Let me just ask. Now, people have asked me, Clay, why do you hate Jews? And my answer has been pretty consistently, I don't hate Jews. I almost admire them. I almost admire them, because if us white Anglo-Saxon Caucasian good old boys had our shit together, we'd own the Federal Reserve, we'd own the Bank of England, we'd own the we would have gone over and taken over England, not the vice versa. I mean, this England still and the Jews and the banks in England still run America.
Yeah. I think you can divide humanity into two groups, and it's the Jews in one group and everybody else in another group, and you could call them the cynical and the hopeful. And the cynical are willing to cheat anybody, including their own families, for something that they think is valuable, but the hopeful are people who realize that other people are just like us and have the same problems and deserve all the same breaks that we hope to get.
And they're pretty upfront about it. You know, they're pretty upfront about it. They tell you in their own books, in the Talmud, you know, it's okay to, you know, sexually molest your children as soon as they come out of the womb.
Right, that's right. I think that's what this whole vampire craze is about. It was the Gothic movement in the 90s, but now it's like out-and-out commercial vampire philia. And it is like you admit to yourself that you're dead, and then you have no conscience and you can do anything to anybody you want, and this is the power that people feel from that replaces the power that has been stolen from them by a society that absolutely will not allow them to think for themselves.
Now, the Mossad's motto, I mean, again, they're right out in the open with it. You know, the Mossad's motto is warfare by deception. I contend that there is a war on the American people right now, the same way there was a war on the Russian people, and how they got us. Well, how clever! I mean, they got the Russians and us fighting each other. And actually, that was 3 communist, Jewish-controlled countries that ganged up on Russia, that ganged up on Libya, they ganged up on Iraq, and now they just got Iran and Venezuela in their sights. Is that these are all the countries that wouldn't go along with central banking.
Yeah, there's very few left in the world now. It's like these are like the last ones, and they're going to complete the totalitarian picture with Iran. I think South America, I think, is defenseless. I may be wrong about that, but you know, the real hope of the world is the alliance of Iran and Venezuela and Brazil and China and Russia against this Jewish monster that is centered in Britain and the U.S. now. The trouble is, both Russia and China and India, and I don't know about the other countries, but they're all subjected to some degree by 2 very bad things. One is that their system was set up by the international bankers because they controlled Mao as well as a lot of other dictators. And this, what was the second thing? I think I forgot. The second thing is the most important thing, is that the big thing that American people have to realize now is that it is these people who are on television, Romney and Gingrich and Obama and all of these people, these are not our leaders. These are not honest people. These are criminals who are stealing from us under the color of this so-called law that they've totally twisted to suit their own purposes. And the result is, I got about $10 to go the next week till my Social Security check, and I'm just like almost every other person in the United States who is, it's like the whole senior citizen canard about having to choose between medication and food. Well, everybody's having choices like that now. Everybody's selling everything they own to try to sustain themselves. And we are, the last drop of our blood is being squeezed out of us by these people who are appearing on and being cheered by television and their fans. And they're saying nothing about what's really happening. All they're talking about is the artificial reality where Syria is a bad country, and since we're a good country, we have to go save the Syrian people just like we saved the Libyan people. And that's why I say, in thinking about the people who lived in Afghanistan and comparing them to us, the whole world is now realizing, this is a growing movement and it's definitely happening, the whole world is realizing that the enemy of everyone in the world right now is centered in the United States, but it's really a larger entity than that. It's the Jewish entity that is essentially based in the city of London, in the banks in Frankfurt. It's all through Switzerland. It is the core of the evil that keeps us locked in this artificial reality and keeps us from living happy lives, and it's also needless, but they've all gone unconscious. There's no reasoning with any of them. There's no appeal to the courts. There's no petitioning your Congress.
There's no FBI agent out there. I walked into the FBI office and I handed them a whole file on 9/11 on Dov Zakheim. That information has just now started appearing, and they don't do anything. They won't arrest any of these people because they work. The FBI and the CIA all work for the bankers. The Mossad works for the banksters. The CIA is not working for the United States. They're working for the one world government, of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. I mean, at least that's my opinion on it, right?
One of the key events that happened right after 9/11 was one of the key investigative tangents that we began following immediately was the put options. The bets that the stock of American Airlines and United Airlines would go down was a put option, and somebody made a very large amount of money off that, and several people were onto that tangent. I don't know if that was a deliberately dropped leak or not, but in following that tangent, it led to the SEC. And the SEC just said, oh, we can't put that information out. It's confidential. So right there, you had the whole picture of what was going to happen to the 9/11 investigation, and that's what happened with the 9/11 Commission and all the other crap.
Now, the 9/11 Commission, what's happening to Americans right now? They lost their homes and all that. They're losing their homes. They're being foreclosed upon. And I'm getting an echo here, and I don't know why. But our founding fathers told us, if you ever allow the banks to issue your money, the banks and the corporations that spring up around them will leave your children homeless in the land we conquered. Yeah. And in 1781, Jonathan Williams recorded in his book, Legions of Satan, that General Cornwallis revealed to General Washington during the signings of the Articles of Capitulation signed by Cornwallis at Yorktown that a holy war will now begin on America, and when it is ended, America will be supposedly the citadel of freedom, but her millions will unknowingly be loyal subjects to the crown. And he went on and explained what would seem to be a self-contradiction. Your churches will be used to teach the Jews' religion, Judeo-Christianity. That's satanic Christianity in my book. In less than 200 years, the whole nation will be working for divine world government. The government that they believe to be divine will be the British Empire. All religions will be permitted with Judaism without even being noticed by the masses, and they will all be under the invisible, all-seeing eye of the grand architect of Freemasonry.
Clayton, I just had a thought. Did you ever see that old Andy Warhol movie called Hairspray?
I vaguely remember.
The main character in it was a 300-pound transvestite whose name was Divine. And I think that's the divine they have in mind.
You know, John, everything that you've said is true. And by the way, I've been publishing for 25, 30 years, or maybe more, and I've never been sued for libel or slander. When I tell a story, I get it right. But I've still been under tremendous attack here. Because because of what I saw at Waco and the research that I've done, and having people like you on my show, I understand that we've been fighting this battle for thousands of years.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Same thing, the whole Mystery Babylon issue, and I've documented that pretty well in my book, Mystery Babylon. You know, that whole Mystery Babylon thing is happening right now. And we got 2,000 years of Bible history warning us about tyranny. What is the Bible about a story, a history of tyranny, of people killing this people and this people, and I referred to Jesus as the first rebel, and the one that solved the problem we've got. How do you fight evil without becoming evil? And I mentioned that to somebody sitting in a bar on Sunday. He was a Christian. He got all upset at me. Oh, you better not talk about religion. And I said, you're talking about, yeah, I'm just working on my master's degree. Yeah, why would I wouldn't talk about something I didn't know about. The Christians are as bad as the Muslims. And the Jews are sitting there egging the Muslims on and digging the Christians. I mean, that's what 9/11 was all about, to turn to point the finger at the Muslims. And you pointed out in your story, which is included in my story, that Woodrow Wilson was a peace candidate, but he lit the fuse that killed 25 million people. And before World War I, sentiment in America was decidedly pro-German.
Yep.
My family was from Germany. My family was the Wolves, the Von Bears. And then suddenly they're the bad guy. What? And everybody turns around. I mean, all of these Jews jump up and start calling us Nazis, and I mean, the Mexicans probably got more of a case, against us Texans. We did kick their ass after the Alamo, but.
The new Germans are the Americans, because the Americans are vilified all over the world, or the American government. And it's still unbelievable to me that ordinary people all over the world still have fond feelings for many of the American people. But all over the world, the American government is the great Satan. And it deserves the title for sure. I mean, we have been misled, misdirected so badly over time that I can't see any way of. What are we fighting for when we're fighting to save the United States of America now? What are we saving? Are we making the world safe for Newt Gingrich to plunder the government for bogus salaries?
Or Clear Channel, we could make the Mitt Romney is Clear Channel, runs Clear Channel. He controls pretty much. He could be the influence behind kicking off Judge Napolitano and all that.
Oh, there are many influences, I'm sure. But are we fighting for the Are we fighting to save our country for the right of Tennessee state troopers to rob people on I-40? You know, what are we fighting for? What are we going to save here? What would happen? How much better off would we be if the federal government suddenly was vaporized and we returned to a confederacy of the states where we could argue about smaller things at least? You know, I don't know if it's even wise to point that up anymore, because we are so far past the point of being able to rectify any of these problems that besiege us, because they are conceived and implemented by the very people we put in charge of ourselves. So if that's not a suicide wish, I don't know what is. Because these people who are making the decisions to establish 44 air bases around Iraq and bring our whole fleet in, you know, that whole thing smacks to me as a setup to destroy the entire American army, which would be in keeping with how the Jews manipulate a country, because for a very long time the Jews gained ascendancy in Germany and were quite put out when their rights were curtailed, even though they owned 95% of everything and were only 2% of the population. They were still mad that any rules at all were put upon them, so they destroyed Germany. And that's essentially what has happened in the United States, where they appealed to our sense of compassion, which we had, and they took full advantage of it by capturing every single thing we own into the future.
John,
and now,
it's
and
certainly
now they've convinced the general populace that the Jews are just another minority like Baptists and Methodists, and they shouldn't be singled out for anything. So and in their control of the media, they become completely invisible to most people, and most people, 98% of the American people, do not understand that all of the information put in their heads throughout their lives has been filtered by Jews, and that's why we're impotent to save ourselves.
The medical profession, John, made drug addicts out of my mother and grandmother. I thought my grandmother was just feeble until I tried one of her sleeping pills.
Yeah.
And they went to the doctor every week to get that prescription. So they're doing the same thing to Americans right now that they did to the Chinese with the opium.
Well, they've drug addicted everyone.
And the pharmaceutical companies are making a fortune of it. Most of them are Jewish-owned, Jewish-run. If not, they're financed by the Federal Reserve. It's one of the corporations that sprung up around it. The other corporations like Monsanto are poisoning us. And now, by the way, we've got Purim coming up. That begins Wednesday, March 7th, and ends the evening of Thursday, March 8th. And that might be fun for Netanyahu, but it might not be good for you. I've got a story about that up there on my website.
Oh, there's a lot of stories about that now, and I don't think it'll be good for Netanyahu unless he's in the bunker, and that might not help either. I was telling somebody the other day that I mean, we've been listening to this hype for years now. They've had carriers off the coast of Pakistan for how many years? 10, 13 years? And it's like each time we get all these internet stories about, oh, how it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. Well, now the stories are saying all of those ships in the Persian Gulf are toast because they're totally puffed targets for Iranian missiles. Easy shots. Israel's a little more difficult proposition, but it looks like they got Israel in their sights too. And I'm reading that Iran is going... This could be the thing that really accelerates the collapse of America, when the American military is destroyed all over the world and America is left defenseless to whomever wants to come and take what they want. And plus Americans are all sick, plus America is polluted. You know, it's not going to be too long before somebody figures out that the best thing that